All units, stand by. We have a mayday.
We noticed that there were firefighters on the other side, and they were dragging a firefighter to that hole. He was not moving. He was completely lifeless.
I've learned how to cope with those, but presently, I think the things I experience aren't the outbursts of anger or the short tempers, the moments of isolation, because again, I try to remedy that with family time, but recurring images of what I saw on May 31st, recurring images of what I saw at the medical examiner's office when I did the final identification of all 4 firefighters. The replay of the 4 firefighters at the funeral home with their bodies draped in flags. The initial dealings with the family and macabre thoughts.
EMT, Matthew, engine 51.
I will tell you this, when you ever experience human bodies being burned, that's a smell you'll never forget. The first time I had a helicopter crash, four white guys, and they were burned up. That's a smell you'll never forget.
It's given me a newfound hope being in the fire department with my job and what I'm able to do and what I've been trained to do. It truly makes me feel like I have purpose here on earth. But it also is a source of flashbacks, triggers. You know, the smell of diesel fuel used to be a big trigger for me. The smell of coagulated blood.
This is the kind of harsh experience that virtually all firefighters will face in their careers. Whether it's running into burning buildings, saving accident or crash victims from the brink of death, natural disasters, or terrorist acts. These brave men and women risk their own lives to save those of innocent victims. However, this comes with a heavy price.
The day after the fire, I came home and I slept most of the day. And that was the last time that I slept for any length of time, without some sort of assistance. I went to the doctor and explained about not sleeping and got some medicine to help me sleep, because if we don't sleep, we can't function to address any of our other issues either. I plan on that being a temporary thing, but sleep has been a major issue. I've definitely been more irritable, and that changes from moment to moment. At one moment, I think I'm feeling better and I'm moving the right direction, and a little bit later, I'm wondering why I ever thought that. So there's a lot of ups and downs. There's certain things that I want to avoid. Anytime I hear a mayday on the radio, it strikes a chord inside much more intensely than it ever did before.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is a growing problem among men and women who don bunker gear. PTSD is an emotional illness which can occur after a person experiences a traumatic event that has caused him or her intense fear, helplessness, or even horror. PTSD is often associated with the experience of being in combat. It came into the public's awareness after the Vietnam War when many veterans were found to be suffering from psychological effects of combat long after returning to the United States. However, we now recognize that many kinds of traumatic experience can lead to PTSD, particularly when those traumatic experiences are more extreme in nature, when the individual is exposed to multiple traumas over time, and when the individual is repeatedly placed in highly dangerous situations. In other words, when they work as a first responder. Dr. David Pearce, EMS Medical Director for the City of Houston and Public Health Authority for the Houston Department of Health and Human Services, describes PTSD as a stress reaction.
PTSD is a stress reaction, and it's titled a stress disorder, but really it's a reaction that people have after they've been exposed to something which has been particularly very stressful. And I think that we think a lot about, in particular today, about the soldier in battle, and that is a classic example. And in fact, we see a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder amongst our veterans returning from war. But we need to have a little bit wider view of it, because there are other things which can set off PTSD, and you don't necessarily have to have been a veteran in war to experience it. Some of the more common symptoms that we see amongst folks who are experiencing PTSD is not I'm back in Afghanistan. It's the constant stress that they feel. And so they will have outbursts over little things that are irritating, but certainly don't generally cause you to raise your voice or throw something across the room, and yet there will be these very intense reactions. An inability to sleep, to fall asleep, because your mind is constantly running, thinking about whatever it is that has you so concerned. Another one is I can fall asleep just fine, but I wake up an hour or two later and I can't get back to sleep. Again, my mind is racing. Makes it difficult. There's some difficulty a lot of times in connecting with others, so it's hard to either establish a relationship with someone or to maintain a relationship.
The other symptoms when I got back from the military side was that I didn't really know how to be a father anymore. I didn't know how to be a husband anymore. I was being told I was withdrawn, and then so here you are in charge of this mission, and that's what it was. The military, you have a mission. That's it. Nothing else. I don't have to worry about normal life, bills, baseball games, throwing out the trash, things like that. To where we're told, we'd go in, this was the mission, this was it. My objectives were there every day. That was my objectives. And then not to mention that as an officer in the military, you were in charge of all these people, and it was not questioned.
Throughout this documentary, firefighters will candidly describe their own personal, tragic experiences and what are they doing today to get their lives back to normal. Medical and mental health professionals will also talk about how debilitating post-traumatic stress disorder can be and how to recognize and manage this illness throughout the help of counseling and sometimes medication. Dr. Keith Gates, Associate Medical Director for HFD and a veteran of Afghanistan, describes PTSD in this way.
So I think the first thing to understand is that stress is a normal response to an abnormal event. Any kind of stress, whether that's work stress, traumatic stress, family stress, physical stress. Your body is designed to change its physiologic makeup in order to deal with something that's being thrown at you. So if you take a subcategory of stress, there's post-traumatic stress. And post-traumatic stress is a normal response to a traumatic event, whether that's time in combat, whether that's something that happens while you're responding to a call on the streets, whether that's an assault or a rape, and even responding to someone who has been traumatized can transfer some of that post-traumatic stress or that traumatic stress onto the actual first responder or police officer or firefighter that's coming into that environment. So post-traumatic stress disorder, the disorder part of it comes when your body's response overwhelms your normal coping mechanisms, and those thoughts, dreams, physiologic responses start to invade your life and start to overtake your normal abilities to have a relationship with your family, whether that's work, whether that causes you anxiety to think about those events, whether going to an area where that event took place, you try to avoid that, or you avoid people that you were involved with. For example, when I was in Afghanistan, a lot of bad things happened, and when I came home, I was reluctant to go hang out with those guys, even though it should have been something that I looked forward to because they were my very good friends, and I found myself doing that. So, when it interferes with your ability to cope or to perform your daily activities of living, that's when it becomes a disorder, and that's when it becomes concerning.
Captain Michael Mears serves as the Houston Fire Department's Family Assistance Coordinator. His main responsibility is to guide families of deceased firefighters through the funeral process after a loss. In this role, he is all too often exposed to traumatic scenes.
Every now and then I'll catch myself in a daze, just kind of gazing off, and it's that replay of May 31st. It's the replay of going to the medical examiner's office. It's just a constant replay of those events.
They're flashbacks.
Absolutely, yes.
And they're haunting.
They can be, and what frightens me, it's very difficult to shake me, and but this particular experience, I hate to admit it, but to be humble, it has affected me. It has shaken me because it makes me realize even more of my own mortality and what I do for a living and how possible it is for me to suffer the same consequences. And that damages my psyche at home sometimes because I lost my parents at a young age. And it's very disheartening to think that my children, being as young as they are, could experience the same things I did as a child, losing their father. And that's, it doesn't matter how fast or how far you run, you just can't get far enough away from those thoughts.
Those symptoms, those reactions.
Dr. Sam Buser, psychologist for the Houston Fire Department, a veteran and former VA psychologist, says that PTSD is an anxiety disorder.
Some of the research suggests that half of all Americans will experience a traumatic event in their lives. If you're a firefighter, you're going to be in that half. You're absolutely going to experience traumatic events. So there's no escaping it. You can't be a firefighter and not have those events. And some of these events are obviously going to be more traumatic than others. Most firefighters will tell me that, well, I've experienced this before, it's part of the job, that's just normal for me. Yet, there are some of those events that will persist and that will be more traumatizing. That doesn't mean that everyone's going to get post-traumatic stress disorder. Most people don't. Maybe, 75 to 90% of the people will not have a post-traumatic stress disorder even after a terrible trauma. But some of us will. And there's no way to predict in advance which ones are going to affect us the most. There's some things that make it more likely to be extremely traumatizing.
PTSD can be seen as a normal reaction to a traumatic situation.
When there is a threat present to anyone, the natural reaction that our body has is the fight or flight reaction. It just becomes activated automatically, and so that's when your heart starts racing, you start breathing differently, sweating, your pupils dilate, all of that. It's a very natural reaction to threat. One of the problems that occurs in somebody who has PTSD is not that their fight or flight system is being activated, it's that they're over-perceiving threat, so it's activated all the time. Naturally activates, but if you see threat everywhere, you will always have that system activated. You will always be in a state of hyperarousal. And over time, that is exhausting to a body and takes a huge toll.
For many firefighters, sights, sounds, and smells are reminders or triggers of previous negative events.
Mayday call, even at age 42, brings goosebumps all on my body just to hear that. Because I know someone's suffering, something's happened. And it's something that's not going to be positive. My thoughts, I would describe it as always a negative.
Typically known as PTSD, that's what people are more familiar with. And it's a disorder that occurs after a traumatic event. For most people, pretty much everybody's going to have some symptoms immediately following an event. It's just natural, you react, you're going to have a reaction. But over time, those symptoms get better, people improve. For a small proportion of people, they don't get better. So you can kind of think of PTSD as a disorder of non-recovery. For whatever reason, something gets in the way of them getting better. So they continue to have the symptoms longer than other people.
Unfortunately, the Houston Fire Department has experienced a number of major events that have been especially traumatic, not only for the firefighters who were immediately involved with these incidents, but also for firefighters throughout the department. These include 71 line-of-duty deaths, including 11 since 2009, numerous serious injuries to firefighters, terrible incidents such as the daycare fire of 2011 in which 4 young children died, and the catastrophic building collapse on May 31, 2013, the worst single day in the history of the department. Typical symptoms associated with post-traumatic stress disorder are Dr. Beeson Smith.
Well, there are a lot of symptoms. The way the symptoms are broken down, there are 3 categories of symptoms. So there's re-experiencing symptoms. That's your intrusive thoughts, that's nightmares, flashbacks. Along with that, you have some of the physiological reactions. So if you're reminded of the trauma, you might become really anxious, you may become shaky, your heart starts to race, tearful, some of those things. That all falls into that re-experiencing category. Another category is hyperarousal. So that's when people are really hypervigilant, they're more on guard, they're edgier, more irritable or angry, they startle easily, sleep difficulties, unable to concentrate or stay focused. And then the last category of symptoms, which I think really makes sense, considering that the re-experiencing is miserable, being on guard and edgy and angry all the time and not sleeping is miserable, there's the avoidance and numbing. So people go to great lengths to avoid being reminded, to avoid feeling all of those things. So they avoid going certain places that remind them of the event. They avoid having conversations about it or seeing people who might be connected to it. They emotionally just shut down and cut off because feeling that much pain all the time is too much. So sometimes people just do it by disconnecting and isolating. Other times they drink really heavily just to numb their symptoms out. But I think it helps me to make sense of all the isolation and avoidance if I think about how miserable the symptoms of PTSD really can be for somebody.
Post-traumatic stress disorder not only affects the person involved in a traumatic event, it also affects their families. Captain Mears' wife, Anita, has noticed changes in her husband's behavior and can only sit back and watch.
If we're having a conversation, can just cut me off and doesn't want to talk about something. Trouble sleeping sometimes, not staying still when he's sleeping, rolling around a lot, fidgeting. Mind wanders, drifts off. Can be short with the kids sometimes, just because again, there's things going through his mind. There are times where he's just came out and cried.
I don't pretend to understand what he's thinking or feeling, or I mean, I have not been through those things, so I can't put myself in his shoes. I get frustrated, so I'm not always the most patient spouse, and I sort of have expectations of maybe how he should act around the kids or towards the kids, and I tend to get very frustrated with him.
I work very hard at living in two different worlds, and those two worlds are your home life, which is where you experience friends and family, and your fire department life. And in your home life, you don't see trauma, you don't see tragic things, you don't see things that aren't supposed to happen to human beings. You don't see the evil that resides in the world. In your fire department life, you do. You're exposed to the raw nature of your fellow man. So when you leave the fire department world and try to come back into your home, it's difficult to continue normalcy in your life. And what's unfair to everyone in your home life is that many people expect you to continue back into a normal routine. But it's very difficult because you're bringing pieces of that world with you into your home because they've collided. And it's difficult to maintain. For me, it's my family. Above and beyond all things, for me, for Michael Meir, it is by far my family. Family time. That's how I cope with everything. The more time I can spend with my family, the better. Because as much as I love the fire department, the sole reason why I work, or why we all work, is to support our family.
Although post-traumatic stress from either combat or from their duties in the department is an issue which many Houston firefighters must face, they do not have to do so alone. There is help. Once again, Chief Munoz.
Once we put the message out that it's all right to talk about it. It is a process. It is a long debriefing sometimes that we have to take. In that process, we will support you in that process. You know, and we have that. And I think as an organization, we have to touch the emotional IQ of some people, of everybody knowing that, hey, what are they going through? Sometimes things are not always black and white. We got to look at the bigger picture. And this organization does that. You know, we're starting to get systems in place, which is, to me, very comforting. We have, you know, the doctors that are here in our staff, and the support and going outside the box. You know, it's more than, sometimes it's, you know, people say, well, just go talk to this person, you're gonna be fine. And that's not the case. So that's not always the case. Some people don't want to talk about it. I know there were some cases where I never felt like I wanted to talk about it because I would have to relive what happened, and you just don't want to do that. You know, and I think sometimes it still comes over where you could save 100 lives, but the one that you lose is the one you beat yourself up.
Coming in kind of behind the initial crews.
Captain Cliff Langton was actively involved in rescue operations at the Memorial Day fire.
I think in my 23 years, I've become a fan of talking. I know early in my career, I was 10 foot tall and bulletproof like most youngsters coming in the department. You tend to feel invincible until you either witness or experience one of these incidences. As I've gotten older, wiser, a supervisor now, you begin to approach things a little different. Some prefer to talk, some don't. I think we all have our own little different ways of dealing with it. You know, it doesn't matter who it is to me. I always reach out and give somebody that opportunity to speak to me if they wish to, in my own way. It helps me and it helps them, whether it's one-on-one or in group settings or however. Since the incident, there's always moments when it's going to come up, and you know, you can feel the tension. Some folks, it's palpable, you know. I just prefer to talk.
Captain Scott Schonfield has been with the Houston Fire Department since 1996 and today is an active member of the Critical Incident Stress Management Team.
The CISM team provides peer support to firefighters and their families for basically any psychological or emotional needs that they have that we can help with. We have peer members, other firefighters in different areas that assist, and we have our mental health professional, as Dr. Buser, providing our clinical oversight, and we do individual and group interventions, sometimes after a scene that has been traumatic for the rescuers. Also, any personal problems, family issues. We don't say no to anybody. We know what our limits are as peers, and when it's time to refer those people to other professionals like Dr. Buser or other resources when they need help.
There's an enormous support system and resources that firefighters can go to with the city of Houston.
Yes. The Houston Fire Department has what we're calling the Firefighter Support Network, which the CISM team is a big part of that. Also includes the work that Dr. Buser does in addition to working with the team. The fire department chaplain, the member advocate, the family assistance coordinator, the union representatives, we all work together to try to make sure we're meeting whatever our members may need.
Kelly Bodat, now a district fire chief, has responded to many fires in her career, including the horrible events of May 31st, 2013, where 4 firefighters died.
Immediately, like I said, some of the symptoms that I could see that were glaring were that I, had no focus. I couldn't keep my focus. Short-term memory loss, irritability, and I think that how people handle things. For me, I like to, when it's something that affects me personally or emotionally, I like to go isolate myself. But one of the things that I commented on was that I was actually glad with all of our firefighter traditions, our group, and every time you're at a station, you have people that have been there for a long time, you have people that have been there for a short time, and everywhere in between, and trying to bond. So forcing all of us to be together, and forcing us meaning that we had events and duties that we all wanted to do to honor our brothers and sisters. At the time, for somebody that wants to be isolated and handle their emotions, I think it ended up being a blessing that we had those things to come together for. And in the past, when we've lost people, it's been nice to have that support system. So at the time, you want to isolate and go off and be by yourself, but it was a good thing that we were all together and processing this together. That was helpful for me.
Once again, Dr. Beeson Smith.
I think in the fire department, a lot of times there's this idea that this is their job, they should be able to handle anything. They're supposed to be trained to handle all of this, to see these horrible things and just move on. And so when somebody goes through a traumatic event and doesn't just go on, it feels like a sign of weakness and something that they don't want to let on. They don't want their command staff to know because they don't want to be labeled as that guy. I think there's a pretty big stigma around mental health problems in the department, or there has been in the past. I'm hoping that's changing. So that guys aren't willing to come forward because they don't want to be that guy. They don't want to be looked at as weak, that they can't handle it. I think there's also this idea that if they do come forward and ask for help and anyone finds out, they'll be pulled out of the station, they'll be put downtown, they'll be put on leave, because people won't trust them anymore. They won't believe that they can handle their jobs. And it's one thing that I've said over and over, and I think is so important to be able to say to the people in command, is that these guys with PTSD, these guys who have experienced a lot of trauma, are the ones you want on your scene. They know how to run a scene, they will do well. They know how to handle chaos, and for some of them even become more calm in the chaos. It's not that they can't do their jobs. A lot of times it's more that they can't do their lives. So once things calm down and settle, that's when they struggle, not when they're on the scene. So taking them out of their jobs is never something I recommend. If somebody's struggling after a trauma, I think it's the best place they can be.
Not all situations that lead to the development of PTSD symptoms are as extreme as combat or the Southwest End fire of May 31st, 2013. Oftentimes, many smaller traumas accumulate and line up like dominoes. They may seem to have little or no effect at the time, but they contribute to the overall severity and symptoms once PTSD develops. The triggering event sometimes takes the individual by surprise, as it does not appear as traumatic on the surface as previous events. However, it may have more impact because it hits closer to home or because the firefighter's capacity to keep the lid on old traumas is at its limit. If a person begins to experience PTSD symptoms and no professional treatment is administered, the condition may worsen. The person with PTSD may then be more prone to self-medicate by abusing alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, prescription drugs, or marijuana.
When you are on guard and your fight or flight system is being activated all the time, it's a really uncomfortable place to be. And so people are trying to settle the physiological reactions. So they do it a lot of times with alcohol or pills. In the fire department, you don't see drugs as much because they're being tested often to see if they're using drugs. So you see more alcohol or medications being misused in order to settle their systems down and be able to calm themselves so that they can handle what's going on in their worlds.
I think it was a combination of things. Between my self-medicating with alcohol and painkillers, taking more sleep medication than I was supposed to, self-medicating to take the pain away. I wasn't a sober person at the time. I distanced myself from my wife. The drinking every day. I guess I kind of had an epiphany in conjunction with my wife saying that I needed to get help.
For some people, the severity of the stress is so great that they contemplate ending it all.
There's a number of times in the past where I felt like I had gotten to a point where I'd lost all hope, and I felt like the only choice that I had at that point was to take my own life. I felt like there was no way that I was going to get better, regardless of what I did. I think there were a whole bunch of times that I had reached that point where I thought suicide was the only option. I was sick and tired of feeling the way that I felt day in and day out.
I think that when you are exposed to that much trauma on a daily basis and don't have an outlet, don't have anywhere to turn, and don't even recognize necessarily that there's a problem with how you're reacting, people become more and more isolated. A lot of times firefighters don't feel like their families can understand what they've been through because they don't see the things that they see. And so the family life feels challenging for them because their spouses or their kids' issues that they have seem to be very mundane, and they don't feel like they're being well understood what they've gone through. So they isolate a lot. And I think that isolation is one of the worst things that can happen to a firefighter because they don't reach out and they don't get help. And after a while, when you're in that much pain and you don't think you have anywhere to turn, suicide becomes a realistic option. And unfortunately, a lot of our firefighters have chosen that. That's one of the reasons that we are really working on this video, that we're trying to get out to the stations and see these guys and make more of a presence, because we want them to understand it's not the only option. There are options through this pain to the other side of it other than death.
Fortunately, there's effective treatment for PTSD.
But once it becomes a problem, then you need to talk about it with people who understand. You need to talk about it with perhaps a counselor because they can give you tools to work through the problems that they can help you identify. You may not even understand that something's a problem. And then there's also medication. Some SSRI medication, which is a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, can help change some of the chemical imbalances that take place in the brain from the stress and the continued stress and its interaction with the tissues in the brain.
I think the thing that I would want for them to understand is that even though it makes sense in your mind not to talk about things, to avoid these things because they hurt, it's the worst thing you can do. That's what keeps them alive. That's what feeds them those memories and gives them the power and the intensity, is not talking about them. And just being able to sit and talk with somebody who gets it can diffuse it so much. It hurts to do it. It's not a fun process, talking about it and remembering. But on the other side of it, there's so much relief that if I could convey anything to these guys, it would be that. Whether it's talking to one of the psychologists or your buddies or your spouse, just to talk about it so that it doesn't own you, and do it in a way where you can take more control of the memory rather than having it intrude on your world when you least expect it.
Dr. Jana Tran, an HFD psychologist who specializes in the treatment of post-traumatic stress, describes the treatment methods that are available.
What I'm doing at the beginning is a lot of education, just teaching people, actually reteaching people about what post-traumatic stress is. There's so much stigma behind the word PTSD or post-traumatic stress that a lot of our firefighters don't even want to explore if this is something that fits for them. And so my approach to treatment is, okay, no problem. Let me just talk to you about what post-traumatic stress is and describe to you what it looks like for a lot of people, and you tell me if it fits for you. And if yes, then we'll proceed. If not, then we can go in a totally different direction. And a lot of times just that knowledge of knowing what post-traumatic stress is brings a sense of relief and is really the first step in treatment.
I think it's extremely easy in this job to forget about how the stress we encounter every day, the stress we've encountered in the past, that we live with every day, truly has an effect on us and our family members, and our friends, on our coworkers, on ourselves. Those effects can be detrimental with somebody thinking that the final solution to it is suicide. For the people who are thinking that, I'd like to reach out to them and just tell them that there is hope and not to lose hope. It does get better. It just takes some effort.
Traditionally, firefighters have been reluctant to talk about their problems because it just wasn't cool. Well, that attitude is now changing. Today, firefighters who have gotten help encourage others to do the same.
I think the image of firefighters has been traditionally that we don't need anybody, we don't need help, we help others, we don't need help. I think that idea is changing in that I think more and more firefighters are willing to ask for help or to seek help.
I think we've come a long way in knowing that, you know, I think sometimes, especially if you don't have a support group or in any kind of incident that you're dealing with, you feel like you're alone, and that just makes matters worse. I think, you know, reaching out to get counseling if you need it, if you're lucky enough to have a support group of your own at home or at work. I think for firefighters or you know, people in the military, it makes it easier to talk to somebody that's gone through what you've gone through and knows what you go through and know what you have to do day to day to maintain, you know, your responsibilities. So that's a nice support group right there. And if it's something you're not comfortable with, then absolutely, you know, we have the system in place. And through this, I've met all the counselors or all of our psychologists, and they have been nothing but fabulous.
If I can take advantage of that help and speed up that process, then I owe that to myself. I owe it to my family. And my coworkers. So I would tell them don't wait. Don't be afraid to take advantage of that.
We would like to acknowledge the courage of the brave men and women in this video who have faced their demons in order to conquer post-traumatic stress disorder and who have been willing to share their experiences with you. They are in the process of regaining their ability to live fully and happy lives. It is our hope that their stories and experiences will help other firefighters who are suffering from PTSD.
I've talked to a number of other firefighters who are having the same difficulties that I'm having. And I've encouraged them to make that phone call, to let somebody know, to take advantage of the help that's available.
I know that transformation is possible, that where they are now, they can't even imagine what life could be like without this trauma haunting them every day. And at the end of the therapy process, I see them lighter, like a huge burden has been lifted. They feel free, they feel connected, they feel hope.
You know, something else with the PTSD, you know, it was something that I used to look at as a curse or an affliction. But through therapy, it's allowed me to get to a point to where I no longer look at it as that. I think it's made me a more resourceful person. I think it's opened me up a lot more. It's given me a newfound hope. Actually given me a larger reason to live. Is I feel like by me continuing to go on and live is honoring my brothers who didn't get to come home. I feel like I at least owe that much to them. I was given the opportunity to come home, and in the least, if I'm gonna live for anybody, I'm gonna live for them. I may be broken, but I'm not defeated.